My, I'm handsome on screen. Anyway, back to it. The Stone Bearer, Chapter 8, The Wizard Story Part 2. I also, in the book, I misspell on purpose a couple of things, like wizards, magic, a couple of things. But let's get on to it. Part 2. Devlin would not say another word until he had drunk not one but 2 flasks of ale and held another full flask tight in his fist. Then did he talk. Everything I said was true except for the Ty-Tal Bantu episode. I did not change him into an aardvark, whatever an aardvark might be. He was doing well enough when I saw him last, although there were dark deeds astir. But I am getting ahead of myself. I'll back up to the events on the night we investigated the wreck of the Tigra. I was nearly eaten alive by the black wolverines of hell. Yes, Devlin, tell us about the wolverines, Day said. How did you get away from them? Not as easily as you might think, the wizard said. Once the cattle wolves of Galoth have your scent, or even worse, have you in their sights, there is usually no chance of escape from them. And yet, I managed to do just that. The Black Devils were closing in on me fast, and I was too weak to go on. Binder and Dreher had gone on ahead, which was exactly as I had planned. The wolverines slowed when they found me, giving my dear friends a better opportunity to escape. I, however, was forced to stand and do battle. There was enough dry timber around to suit my needs, so uttering a carefully chosen word, I encircled myself within a ring of protective blue fire. This startled the wolverines momentarily, for they do not love fire of any color, giving me just enough time to mount the lower branches of a sturdy pine tree. From this exercise, I was so exhausted that I feared that I might faint and fall from my perch and run into their snapping, drooling jaws. I was able to taunt them from there, angering them even more, allowing Dreher Commander Binder a few precious seconds more. Excuse me. One unusually large wolverine jumped the fiery blue ring and came at me. I called to the beast in the ancient tongue that it feared before it could seize my leg, and it went temporarily mad, rolling in the sticky blue flames. And it quickly turned the way it came, madly attacking its brethren. Thus, I was able to climb one step higher. Now, another wolverine broke through and lunged, seized my cape, ripping it from around my neck, nearly yanking me down from the tree. I tried to set him ablaze, but my aim was off and I missed. Another tree lit up instead with flames of gold. I was too weary to perform any more magic, so all I could do was climb higher with the last of my quickly waning strength. Somehow, I clung to my cane. I thumbed boldly. High enough now for a brief respite. All but 2 wolverines gave up on me and passed on by. Up the trail, after our good Dreher Freygood and Commander Benjamin Biner, a pack of nearly 50 of those foul dread beasts, if my count was right. I clung to the tree trunk like an infant to its mother's teat and recited my blessings. The 2 wolverines circled hungrily below me, snarling and gnashing their teeth, their red eyes glowing as hellish fiery coals. It was literally a nightmare come to life. I continued to slowly climb whenever I could, hoping to somehow signal Stardeer from the top of the tree. Although the thin limbs swayed dangerously in my weight, I was able to get my head up above the treetops and take a good look around. I could not locate Stardeer, but I did see many other disturbing things. 2 great Garnian warships, the aforementioned Mount of Steel and the Godstruck 5, were methodically destroying each one of the Gogmore ships with missile blasts as they rose from the forest, as easily as knocking flies from a window with a swatter. The warships were flying low, riding the tops of the trees to avoid being spotted by the towers of Tungulin or Bondoon. One of them, the God Strike 5, came right for me. I thought it would knock me from my perch if I didn't descend immediately, but I took my chances and waited there, hoping to learn something new or perhaps do some kind of damage before my inevitable demise. Fortunately, I was able to seize a horizontal fin as the huge craft passed me. It was as easy as stepping off of a step and onto a conveyor. I held on tight because the ship raked through the treetops, shearing off limbs and sharp needles. I had no way of getting inside the ship from there or off of it. I had to hold on for dear life, knuckles red with blood, and just ride it out for as long as I could, all the while praying for a miracle. I was dragged up against the trees many times, and many times I nearly fell to my death. My greatest fear was that the warship would take off into the heavens at speed, and unable to maintain my precarious hold, I would then fall from on high and plummet to my death. Miraculously, that did not happen. The destruction of the Gogmore warriors continued on until none were left alive, at which point the two great ships headed back toward Bondoon. The Garnians were going there to lie to Garwin, to say that it had been King Bantu's Tungulin warships that had destroyed his Gogmores. As soon as we began our descent to Garwin's courtyard in the heart of the castle city, I was spotted by the Gogmore soldiers in their watchtowers clinging to that fin. They surrounded me in great numbers as we landed and apprehended me without a fight and cast me to the ground without mercy, vowing to skin me alive and take me before the great warlock Garwin to slowly die at his feet. Then the Garnians came forward to claim me, and I was taken into their custody instead. There I was beaten in the courtyard, but I feigned deaf mute. The Garnian general in charge, Shanbark, was his name. Shanbark. He had his soldiers take me inside his ship for further interrogation. He told me that he had some very particular tools and techniques that would make me tell him everything he wanted me to know. And I believed him. I was convincingly terrified and naive, quaking and cowering before the lot of them, although I had already been scheming up a delicious plot of my own. I had never before been inside a Garnian warship, and I hope that I never will again. They are not what I imagined them to be at all. They are very clean, pristine, and dark. The Garnians favor black and red, but much inside was polished silver. Everything is organized and precise. The controls, the decor, the soldiers' quarters, the layout and design of the pathways and catwalks, and the prison. This proved to be their detriment and their ultimate downfall, for the layout of the ship was so predictable that I felt as though I knew my way around almost immediately. To my dismay, they stripped me nude, took the charts and maps I had recovered from the Tigra, and then they snapped my cane in two. My sweet Ithamboli. I do not believe that they knew I was a wizard because they took very few precautions. I was thrown headlong into a holding cell. Thankfully, I had removed the crystal from the head of my cane beforehand and had hidden it by sleight of hand while they searched me. That crystal was enough to soften the tumblers in the lock of my cell so that I could force the heavy door open after all had departed. I moved fast, not knowing how much time I had before they discovered my escape. I wasn't sure from moment to moment what was going to happen. I climbed, I crawled, I jumped, I slithered where I could, and still naked, ran across a brightly lit tarmac. Eventually, I found where the engineers kept their uniforms, although the one I chose, the smallest that there was still too large for me. I then moved throughout the ship for a while, disguised as one of them, hiding from soldiers when I needed to, investigating the components, and always searching for a door or an escape route. There was enough ammunition on board to blow the warship sky high, so I wired a detonator and hid it near the turbines where it would not be found. I set a small box of explosives near the expander motor. As soon as the turbines went, I knew a chain of reactions would ensue, and the ship would soon follow. I then rigged a second detonator and hid it in the bottom of a satchel. I used the ship's comm to call the other ship to have someone come pick it up. I told them that it was some highly classified paperwork from the wrecked Tiger that had been found on a deceased Moore, and that General Shandark had suggested that they have a look at it, blah, 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 as well. This intrigued them, and they were fooled. They said they were sending a troop of Gogmores to escort me from my ship to their ship, and that they would rendezvous with me to the others' loading foyer in 10 minutes. This barely gave me enough time to find the exit ramp before my anxious escorts arrived. Well, the Gogmores were suspicious of me right from the outset, sniffing at me with their keen noses. After all, I was the smallest guardian they had ever seen, and my wrinkly clothes were comically oversized. I handed the sealed satchel with the detonator to the foremost Gogmore and ordered them to follow me. "Keep an eye out," I barked at them in their own tongue, using a guardian accent as best I could. That's some feat when you're as nervous as I was. "Hurry on now, no dawdling. Keep up, there's a good lad," and such on and so what, and this and that and that and this. We were heading down the ramp and across a bustling courtyard beneath the very noses of the preoccupied guardians, just as the alarms went off everywhere. My escape had been discovered. He paused for a moment, extending his empty flask towards Dreher to have it refilled. "Another time, sir. This oration has me parched." "How is it that you were able to use the Guardian comm to signal the other ship?" Binder asked. "Surely the comms are coded, and the military dialogue is not known to any other than the Guardians." "Excellent question, young Commander," Devlin said. "I took a great risk, jeopardizing my own safety to attempt this, but I felt as though I had nothing to lose. Fortunately, in my recent studies, even during the very night of our secret council in Tungulin, I had been analyzing a stolen Doxus manuscript containing Guardian field tactics and communications. Although it was very well antiquated, I memorized the very basics: how to use equipment, how to signal, transmit, and receive messages, how to mimic an officer, just enough to get by. My intentions at that time were to learn as much as I could about their field codes and comm dialogue in case we intercepted random transmissions at our stations in Tungulan. I had no idea that I would ever put that knowledge to such practical use, and so soon. Amazing, Date replied. The wizard's luck is most amazing, Binder was inclined to agree. Please continue, sir. You smell of humans, the lead Gogbor said to me as we crossed the loading dock towards the other ship. There was utter chaos everywhere, what with the destruction of so many of their fighter craft. You are the smallest Garnian I have ever seen, he said in his guttural tongue. Why do you wear a blaster helmet to cover your face when there is no blaster fire here in the city? His suspicions were getting the better of him, and I feared that I would not be able to get much further before they discovered me. I was so exhausted. Too many questions, I snapped at him. Mind your own duties. I have to discuss with very important people, and so on and so forth. Once on board the Mount of Steel, I took the detonator back from them and left the confused Gogmore soldiers behind at the service door. I do believe that it was at that moment that I was the closest to getting caught when I left that boorish Gogmore brute standing there with his finger in his ear. He knew that I was no Garnian soldier. Behind me, the real Garnians began boarding the ship in waves to prepare for departure to Bandoon. I slid into the shadows and crept down a ventilation shaft to find the engine room of that great ship. After sabotaging the Mount of Steel in the same way that I had sabotaged the Godstrike 5, I tried to go quickly back the way I had come, but I could not. The only way out of was past an inspection station that had filled with a garrison of rowdy Garnian soldiers coming back on board, alert and snappy, and they would not be as easily fooled as a dim-witted Gogmores had been. I was then trapped inside, and I knew that I did not have much time before the explosions began in both the big warships. I had no choice but to hide and wait, and to look for some other opportunity to escape. I found a service stairwell leading to the lowest decks and crept into the belly of the warship to just explore. At this time, Dedlin stopped his oration again momentarily to savor a drink, of ale, and a puff on his pipe. Talking makes me thirsty, he reiterated. Another refill, if you would, my dear friend. The suns went behind a deep cloud, covering them in a summer shadow. To the northeast, great monolithic stones stood starkly from the horizon like crooked spires and towers. The sun's light upon them glowed a brazen summer gold. The crew members had been enraptured by Dedlin's every word and were waiting anxiously for him to continue on. He was about to do just that, but something out on the horizon beyond the next chunk of hills caught his attention. He squinted. So then, I awaited there. Hold on one moment, he said, eyes widening. He rose to his toes, peering out at the horizon. What is that? Is that what I think it is? To the south of them, there were tiny wisps of white clouds rising from the trees on one hillside. Not a misty, wet cloud like dew or fog, but a dry, fluffy cloud comprised of millions of fuzzy white specks. It is. My story can wait a moment, for we have a rare opportunity here, I believe. Well, what is it? Quan asked nervously. Drop the fish nets, Dreher suggested. We'll pull some on board and have us a treat while Devlin finishes his fine oration. What is it? Quan repeated. Candy trees, Dreher answered. Must be a grove down in these woods, Gabriel answered. I see a few clouds floating up in the wind. The seed ponds open and release the seed flux every year around this time. They float skyward in the wind and travel miles before falling. Very tasty, too. Head right for it, Percy, my friend, the wizard said. What an unexpected treat. My pleasure, the Mahekian said, pulling the guide stick slightly to the right. The fuzz is tangy and sweet. It melts right in your tongue, Dreher told them. And at the heart, there's a tasty little brown nut. Dreher had joined Percy at the helm. Here's what I was looking for, he replied, pressing a button. Just before Stardeer plunged through the fluffy cloud, 2 oval fish nets protruded from the hull beneath Stardeer. For a few seconds, the crew was enveloped by the swarm, but in a flash they emerged from the seed cloud again, the fish nets filled with hundreds of fist-sized balls of candy tree cotton retracted quickly back into the holding tanks of the hull automatically. Woohoo! They cried. Devlin laughed long and hard. It was a merry sound. I'll go get our treats, Dreher Freygood piped, dashing eagerly down into the hold. Go ahead, Devlin. Don't wait for me. Very well, Freygood, the wizard replied. But you're not tricking everyone. We all know you want the best candy for yourself. Just don't eat too much of it or you'll get sick. Another round of ales, Lake Tobias said, bringing up a jar to pour. Where was I? Oh, yes, in the belly of the beast, Devlin said, finally continuing. I waited long in the lowest level of the ship, down where the Garnians store their food supplies, he said. It was cold and dark. My body was aching, and I had suffered some minor injuries that night, so I probably needed a spot of rest before going on. Anyway. However, at my ripening old age, sleep can sometimes be a powerful enemy as well. Before I knew it, I was hard asleep. When I awoke, the ship was moving. My heart leaped because I knew it was going to blow. And I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep there. There were no windows at that level, so I had no idea where we had flown to and for how long. I only knew that I had to get off that ship immediately before I perished there. Just then, the door opened, and an old, pudgy, glocky cook came down the stairs. He hit a switch, and the lights came on. I was instantly discovered. He asked me who I was and what I was doing, so I told him. And I told him what I had done. I had a blaster pointed at him, so he was a very attentive listener. I told him that if he didn't help me get off the ship right away, that we were both going to die there. He made me promise that I would take him with me if he showed me a way out, and I agreed to save that poor sod. He was barely more than a slave anyway, and claimed that he would be forever grateful if I could free him from the Garnian's brutal control. How I could resist such a request? Similarly enough, there was a garbage chute in the next room, and it opened by a pull of a lever. We found by peering through that the ship was just above, as standing nearly a forest, and that it was now daylight outside. I wondered why the bombs had not yet gone off, and prayed that they had not somehow been discovered. The trees below us were very close, but still too far to jump to. We tried hard to come up with some kind of plan, but there were no sleds, ropes, or cables. Just then, an explosion went off that knocked us to the floor. We could hear the gases blowing from the turbines. It was so loud that I thought my ears would burst. Then there were more explosions from above, and the warship turned up onto its side. Everything began sliding across the floor. The cook and I were nearly buried alive by the overturned trays of frozen meats and fish. Then I heard the other ship explode, and I knew at once that the detonators had done their job. I think I yelped with successful joy. These great warships are virtually indestructible by an outside attack, But thankfully, I had discovered that they were certainly susceptible to sabotage from within. Well, the cook and I crawled back to the garbage chute while watching the trees draw closer as the ship fell, spinning toward them. Our only hope was to jump at precisely the right moment to catch the branches and hold on with all our might. If we waited too long, we knew that the great ship would fall right on top of us and crush us. We took our chances and leaped, tumbling down and out of the chute, reaching for the nearest pine tree. Both of us hit a tree and desperately seized the sharp branches. Our combined weight pulled the treetop over so much that we heard wood splintering. The warship came spinning down toward us, pressing against the tops of the trees, the very same fin that I had clung to on the other ship the night before hit me on the head as it passed. I was dazed, but somehow I hung on. The mound of steel veered off and crashed 100 yards away in a swirling dervish of gases and flame, and beyond that, the Godstrike Fly suffered a similar fate. The pair of ships were destroyed. After a time, the cook and I managed to climb down, and we headed back to Tunguland with the aid of an overgrown hog and a saddle. But that story is long and embarrassing and has no real bearing on the outcome of this particular tale. When I reached the King's Chambers that afternoon, you had already left, and I was glad. Things were not safe for King Day in Tunguland anymore. Traitors, spies, and Garnian sympathizers were being rousted by the dozens. I told Van Tu my story, and he told me this. He had seen the warships go down and told me of his encounter with the traitor Sabre Johnhausen. I was disheartened from his words and weary from the night's tiresome exploits. I longed to leave immediately while your trail was still warm, but Van Tu ordered me to rest while he made preparations for my departure. So, with bottle in hand, I retired to my quarters beneath the music chambers and slept the night through. My, what adventures you had, Gabriel said. I'll have a flagon of ale myself to cheer this wizard among wizards. As will I, consented Dreher Freygood, and some more candy. I'll have some of that, Day said, seizing a handful of white fluff from Dreher's bowl. Let me pour, Commander Binder said. I insist. If nothing else, wizard, you can still tell a marvelous story. And yet, it does not end there, Devlin told them. The most ironic may still be to come. Well, what about the charts and maps you recovered from the Tiger? Day wanted to know. What news of Meade? Were there any messages for me? There were none. I read what I could while I had them and learned much about the pilot of the doomed craft. But alas, the Garnians took from me all the scraps I had, save this crystal, which I have now rebounded on a new Itham-Boatley walking stick, very much improved, Devlin answered, displaying his fine new instrument. However, that loss pales in comparison to what has been gained. The next tidbit of wonderful news that I present to you now. You see, one substantial thing was saved from the wreck of the Tigra. The pilot of the Tigra himself. He not only survived the crash, but he spoke with King Bantu in great lengths the very night before your departure. In fact, they became very close, and King Bantu insisted that he and the pilot of the Tiger should get engaged and should join this very expeditionary party, which he did gladly. I am he, Pythagoras admitted. The Tiger was my craft. What? Binder piped, nearly spilling his drink. The Thordian came forward to give his part of the tale. I flew solo from the great fortresses of Isle Mead, not with a message for King Day, as you all once suspected, but with information for King Bantu, lists of spies who had infiltrated Mead, Tungulin, Poed, Sissel, and Din Diane. The maps and charts I left behind and that Dedlin found were little more than utilitarian and would have served little purpose. I was attempting to reach Tungulin before King Day did to give Commander Binder lists of spies and assassins that I had long since memorized before my overseas departure. That is how we were able to thwart the assassination attempt on King Bantu's life. I had arrived with that information just in time. It was a harrowing flight from the onset. Once I had arrived on the mainland, the Garnian sentries were at once on my trail. They tracked me for a week, but gave full chase as I neared Tungulin. The Mount of Steel and the Godstruck 5 appeared as I crossed the last few miles of Galoth. Once they surmised my destination, they signaled me to stop and tried to force me to the ground. When I would not, they opened fire upon me. I survived the crash, mostly unscathed, and went forward from there on foot to Tungulin at full haste to make my case. I had been deprived of sleep for many days, and I was hungry and weary. Forgive me for my clandestine manner and standoffish demeanor, but I hope you now understand. I could not let that information fall into the wrong hands. I have been a stalwart patriot in the service of the family of Day my entire life and could not accept failure. A fellow median, Day said, delighted. We have much to discuss. Yes, Your Highness, Ott said, winking. I have served as one of your secret guards in Mead since I was a cub. My order works in secrecy, as you know, and I am adept in keeping my own secrets as well. Your Highness thought that he might have recognized me before, and perhaps he had, for I, with my brethren, have been close by your side in one way or another for many events for many years, holding that oath and position by vow of honor and threat of death, until I could be certain every person on this craft could be trusted. I thought it best to shield my identity. I insisted that King Bantu order this departure immediately. With this list of spies in hand, Bantu's own safety was at great further risk. His plate was full with the assassination attempt, the Gogmore invasion, John House's deceit, and until Dedlin Dane perchance returned, there was nothing else he could do for you there. Gabriel and Day shared a glance. What a remarkable revelation. Dedlin continued now back on his part of the story. My turn, he started. After I woke the next morning, I was relieved to hear about Ott's involvement and the presence on this quest, and that Dreher and Binder had also joined in, and that Percy, the king's very own master pilot, was along as well, manning the helm. That I went back to my room and slept the rest of the day and night through. The Gogmores were attacking on several fronts, but Wheat had matters well in hand. I needed to reload, recover, and to think. There were some things to do in Tugland before I left. I found the freed cook a job, for one thing, and I hope he enjoys his newfound citizenship there. He made me a wonderful grilled fish dinner with a chocolate souffle before I left. Also, there was much ado surrounding the news of the death of the assassin Tersdal the Brute. There appeared to have been several rewards for his insidious hide from all that the around the kingdom. So I let the authorities know that Prince Gabriel and Diane had insisted that all of his share of the reward money go to the farmer Farringdon and his good family. Why not? Gabriel replied with a smile. He pulled me up from a long fall. The wizard continued. Bantu had received information that a Gharnian air fleet was crossing Galgaraya right in your flight path, and he bid me haste to my own departure to intercept you before you cross paths with them. I persuaded Lake and Quan to join me, and I left hours before dawn the next day. All right, I searched far and wide, questioning townsfolk and travelers I passed. When I found Percy's sun shaft, I feared the worst, but hoped for the best. I knew you'd have to follow the old east road on foot, so I came hard and fast after you. I found one of your camps, and the coals beneath the earth were still warm. There were rumors of Gharnian scout ships in the area, so I was fearful. By the time I reached Arrowgreen, you were toying with the wood elves. I tried to make my presence known then, except that I spotted the Gharnian soldiers disembarking from their ships in numbers. I couldn't risk exposing myself to them just yet. I saw you, Day added. I tried to stop. It was good you dove into Arrowgreen right then and there. They were heavily armed and coming to capture you, to take you hostage before you could disappear into that valley of moths. Arrowgreen is a true marvel of the world, Devlin said. But I wasn't sure what effect it would have on you all. I used to play in the moths as a boy, mostly on the outskirts, and later, as a young wizard's apprentice, I'd cross Arrowgreen with other novice wizards just to entertain myself. I am nearly immune to their influence now, and I know a spell or two to make them disperse temporarily. Although smoke works wonders too, they loathe it. Therefore, I am very much at ease in Arrowgreen. I hid Stardeer on the opposite side and found my way into the swarm on foot, praying that I was not too late. I ran down a different path than the one you used to cross the valley, a shortcut that I knew would get me further downstream, ahead of you. I knew that with the storms of the last few days. Arrowgreen's waters would be flood swollen, and that you would never make it across without some kind of tumbling trouble. When I reached the last bridge, I heard splashing coming my way. I went to the bank just in time to pull Commander Binder and Sir Pythagoras to safety on the side at the last moment. And then 1 moment later, King Day and Prince Gabriel came floating and splashing by, and they too were rescued there. There's a bridge in Arrowgreen? Dreher asked. There are 4. As I said, I found our doomed swimmers as they passed the last one, right at the head of the Falls of the Sky, Devlin said, just inches before they went over the side. Shivers rode up Gabriel's spine. He quivered. As soon as I was sure that no one else was floating past, I located Dreher and Percy wandering foolishly about. I believe you know the rest of the story. They all took turns thanking the wizard and drinking to his health and prosperity. Devlin drank 1 more flask himself, looking at the suns sailing high in the cobalt sky. The morning is turned into afternoon, and this drink is going to my head. I'm ready for a spot of lunch. If no one else is, he said, then we'll get down to the important matters closer at hand. With Lake and Cran's assistance, Dreher Freygood brought out trays laden with cheese, bread, and butter, leftover ham and eggs from that morning's breakfast, fried mushrooms, and 2 fat girl hens that had been marinating in a tart lemon garlic sauce overnight, served with wild rice and onions. There was no time for baking potatoes, but there were fresh fruits for whoever wanted them. Apples, strawberries, brown berries, and miniature coreless pears. The candy tree seeds made a wonderful dessert. Everyone was full. Even Pythagoras, whose belly it seemed had no bottom to it, sometimes when there was only meat. A great monolithic stones had passed into the distance, and now there were rolling fields and gently sloping hills on all sides of them. An occasional singular tree appeared now and again with wide outspread branches, usually one every 2 or 3 miles or so. It was a lonely land, but wholesome and welcoming. They ate and drank together, marveling at both Devlin's and Ott's remarkable stories over and over again. They were asked to repeat parts of it or explain things further, which the wizard and the Thordian were both more than willing to oblige. Devlin was apparently delighted at his own exploits, too, praising his luck often. Ott found his place as a guest of honor among the crew there that evening and experienced more backslapping than he cared for. He was a humble servant and seemed a bit uncomfortable with the newfound respect, praise, and admiration he was being shown. When the plates were empty and the flask not more than half full, Devlin placed his eyeglasses on the hook of his elongated nose, appearing cross-eyed as he lit up his pipe once more. And now down to it, my good friends, what only a few here know in full, we will now share with the rest, he said. Gather round and hear me well, so that you may decide your path, for there is still time to turn aside if you should choose to. The way ahead will not be easy, and is fraught with perils unknown, greater than any of you have experienced thus far. I will give our enemy his name and reveal what it is that young King Day now seeks. You will understand why he has sought our help and assistance. Then choose to remain or to be on your way at our next stopping. No ill thoughts will befall you from those who choose to go on, should you decide to stand down, for no greater task has ever been asked of good men. Do we all understand? All nodded to him. He cleared his throat and began. This is it then, he said. In essence, gentlemen, we are in, with no simpler word for it, a race. The wizard told them. An absolute crucial race that affects the fate of all who live on the kingdom continent. Presently, we are ahead of the enemy at this early stage, but not by much. We will soon pass from Galgaria into Tus, and from there to Commander Binder's own homeland, Gorn. Somewhere in a desolate region of Gorn, our destiny awaits us. That is our final destination, if we can make it. I say somewhere in Gorn because currently the exact finish line of this race and its final detail is still a bit unknown. It is a very secretive, sacred place. A cave in a mystical wood surrounded by old magic and cribs of forever blooming jasmine night flowers. But it is a precise location. It's known to no living being now, including myself, unless the great sorcerer, Oziah Avix, who I've not seen or heard from in years, still knows. I have found no maps or books that describe the location of this sacred cave, if any ever existed. I only have a vague idea, and that is the best we can hope for. But once we get close enough, things will run by themselves if my theories are correct. In the meantime, our adversaries in this race pursue us in increasing numbers. Guardians and assassins and some creatures more foul than I now wish to tell you. You'll know too soon. They will stop at nothing. They will allow. They will follow. They will apprehend us if they must, because they too do not know where the finish line is. Fortunately for us, they believe that we do know, and that may ensure a degree of temporary reprieve. They cannot kill us, yet they need us to show them the way. They seek this sacred place tirelessly now, pressing all their thought and might to find it. Why do they do this? They are led to do so by an enemy we must now speak of. An enemy of old who has returned to this land. An enemy dark and powerful, whose ancient powers are returning to him after eons of neglect and complacency. It is he who now drives our adversaries like a cruel whip. If you have never heard the name of Gilgahar before, then hear it now. For Gilgahar has returned to the fortresses of Garn and is the might, the inspiration, and the force behind the ambitious Garnian army and many other dark, foul creatures now traveling abroad. We are reliving the tales of old, my friends. We are swept up in them now. Whether you believe the tales of old or not is unimportant, because obviously Gilgahar and the Garnians do. Otherwise, they would not be putting all of their efforts into keeping this one small boy from reaching the destination of his ancestors before they do. He wants what we want from that sacred cave, a magical stone. Gabriel, the key, if you will. Gabriel reached into his shirt and revealed the stone key. Many of you have heard the legendary stones of power, the ancient stories of how the original lord of this kingdom continent, the first day of Mead, released one or more of his great powers in the safekeeping of these mystical stones and hid them throughout his vast kingdom when he decided to choose human mortality. This key and a few sacred words that I have yet to reveal unlocks one of these stones, about the size of an apricot, I'm led to understand, from its hold within this extraordinary Gornian cave. There are some on both sides of this conflict who believe that by rejoining King Day to this stone, that one or more of the 5 stones, the 5 great powers in this universe, creation, love, life, time, or utter destruction, will become his to command. Gilgahar fears no army, but he fears the same fate that sent him into exile in the beginning of our age. He fears that Day will reach this stone first and will acquire a power equal or to greater than his own. And he cannot allow this to happen again. He will try to stop us all by all means at his command. His will follow us to the cave to destroy the stone or to try to take it for his own, and then he will kill the young king and all who aided him. Then his rise will go henceforth unchecked. There was a moment of contemplative silence. Questions? What do we do after we reach this cave and acquire the stone? Dreher asked. What then? Only the future knows, Dedlin answered. I personally believe that there are 4 other stones besides this one for each of the great powers. When we obtain the first one, we will reassess our mission then. I am hoping an answer will present itself, for better or worse, as it often does. Right now we have a race to win and a prize to seize. Day then spoke up. I knew of this sorcerer Uzziah Abbix that Dedlin speaks of. I knew him well. He was the greatest counselor to my father in Mead, and his years with my family went further back than anyone alive could guess, nearly to the beginning of the age, Benny said. As you know, my family's reign had enjoyed many generations of peace and prosperity the kingdom over. Then some years before I was born, my father began growing concerned about what he sensed as a shifting in the kingdom tides, and was often in council with his staff and a great sorcerer, discussing these intuitions and adjacent matters. As a symbolic gift to me on my 7th birthday, Uzziah Abbix entrusted my parents with this key and told them that he may someday return, if need be, to recover it. But for the time being, he said that the key was not safe in his possession while he traveled abroad. And off he went to a place called Ben Miner's village. After the passing of my parents, Uzziah's visits became less and less frequent, and then one day stopped altogether. He was not heard from since. We watched as subversive events unfolded across the continent with no word or sign from him, and still we yearn for his return. Over 2 harrowing years, without his guidance and wisdom, my counselors and I began meetings, many meetings, concerning the quest for the stone. We could not decide if we were acting too late or if I was leaving Mead prematurely. We desperately needed the counsel of Uzziah Abbix the Great, but there was none to be had. Spies began to appear, and the rumors of assassins. Our scouts reported seeing guardians leaving their southern gates and multitudes and building walls and fortresses along the seas to the west and the mountain rims in the south. Good men were being seduced with false promises and lies and were marching southward to join the armies there. One evening during Midsummer's Eve festival, word reached us that they were making preparations to come across the seas to Mead. They had begun their search for me in earnest and for the family's stones of power. I can tell you that my father was right. The tides have certainly turned, and we are set on irrevocably course. There is no more stalling. I am moving forward with anyone who will come along, or by myself. This is our only chance, and it is terrifying. Gilgahar is a primal god and an all-powerful enemy. I am not. I'm just me. I must retake the stone of my forefathers and all the power and responsibility that it bears if we are to stand up to this oncoming onslaught. Otherwise, we can fight and toil and crumble and die. Our way of life as we know it will cease to exist. And I believe that with what Dedlin says is right. I have never said this before, never told a living soul, but I believe what he said about things moving on their own course. I can honestly say that I feel the stone drawing closer. I can hear it in the ghost of my soul. With each passing day, its signal becomes stronger. I know that I'm coming for it. It knows that I am coming for it. It awaits our reunion. It calls me. And until that reunion, no guardian shall ever lay a hand upon you, Pythagoras said grimly. To that cause I pledge my life. As do I, Gabriel said. No guardian or any other fell man or beast. I pledge the same, Graf Freygood said. As do I, said Commander Binder. Then Percy. Devlin puffed. Lake? Cran? Are you both part of this crew now? What say you? They looked at one another, then back to the wizard. We're in, they said. Then we are one, Devlin decreed, and we are making history together. To the stone of power, Dreher cheered, holding his flagon aloft. And to the stone bearer, King Day of Mead, they toasted. To the wizard, Gabriel said, may his stories never cease to amaze. And to the illustrious crew of Stardeer, with whom the stone bearer gladly entrusts his life, Day gratefully acknowledged, we shall not fail. I, for one, am enlightened, delighted, and impressed with each of you, Percy said. And now the story is told in full. It is good to know you all, and even better, that no secrets may build any walls between us anymore on this most noble and gallant journey. Day looked up to see Devlin's kind eyes watching him. Pythagoras, too, knew his secret and had said nothing of it so far. The Thordian nodded knowingly at him and winked supportively. Perhaps the time had come for him to shed his skin, he thought, at this time of honesty and forthright declarations. No more secrets. The thought of that sounded liberating. I have one last thing I would like to say, Day began, a rosy flush rising from his neck to his cheeks. Devlin nodded supportively. For the sake of complete honesty, especially since everyone is opening up, so the crew looked at him, but it was directly to Gabriel that Day intended to direct his message. I am not... Excuse me, Cran suddenly blurted out witlessly, uncomfortable about interrupting, but unable to keep silent. There's something out there that I think someone ought to see. Please, hurry. That's the end of the chapter. Next chapter is chapter 9, Tuss.